I never imagined that firing 28 janitors in 2 months would bring my perfect world crashing down, not because of some corporate reckoning, but because of a crayon drawing. My name is John Harrington, and until recently, I was the quintessential self-made man, a tech mogul whose name was synonymous with innovation and admittedly ruthless efficiency. My company, Quantum Innovations, had just hit a valuation that made Forbes sit up and take notice, and my sprawling estate in the Hamptons, a testament to my relentless drive, was impeccably maintained by a rotating crew I barely registered. Each morning started with a power breakfast, artisanal coffee brewed by a machine that cost more than most people's cars, then straight into the Tesla, making calls to my executive team, dissecting market trends, always with an eye on the bottom line. Efficiency was my religion, optimization my mantra. I believed in lean operations, in cutting the fat, and human resources, unfortunately, often felt like the fattest part. The janitorial staff in particular seemed an easily replaceable expense, a relic in an increasingly automated world. My initial directive had been simple: streamline, reduce overhead, explore robotic cleaning solutions. What followed was a systematic, almost clinical dismantling of the cleaning department. 28 faces, some I'd seen for years, others for mere weeks, reduced to rows in a spreadsheet, then to severance packages, and finally, to nothing. Each dismissal was justified, logical, unemotional, at least on my end. I told myself I was doing what was best for the company, for the thousands of investors who trusted me to deliver ever-increasing profits. There were no grand farewells, no heartfelt speeches. Just a notification from HR, a final paycheck, and the quiet whir of a door closing behind them. My wife Sarah, a woman whose empathy often felt like a stark contrast to my pragmatism, occasionally raised an eyebrow or offered a quiet, "Are you sure, John? Some of them have been with us for years." I'd brush her off with a wave of my hand, a confident smile, and a spiel about progress, about adapting to the future. She'd sigh, return to her garden or her charitable work, and the subject would drop. My 7-year-old son Billy was largely oblivious, wrapped up in his Lego castles and superhero comics, though I did notice him occasionally asking why the lady who always brought me cookies wasn't around anymore. I'd deflect, tell him she found a better job, or moved away. Children's memories were short, after all. A few weeks into my purge, I skimmed a news article about a rival tech company, EcoClean Solutions, actually investing in their janitorial staff, offering higher wages, benefits, and even tuition assistance. They were lauded for their human-centric approach, and their stock was climbing. I scoffed, tossing my tablet onto the polished marble table. "Soft-headed idealism," I muttered, sipping my espresso. "They'll be out of business in a year. You can't run a corporation on sentimentality." The thought lingered, a tiny, almost imperceptible prick of unease, but it was quickly buried under the weight of my convictions. The first few firings had been easy, numbers on a page. But as the tally climbed, a subtle shift began to occur. The office felt different, not cleaner, not more efficient, but emptier. A silence had settled, an almost sterile absence of human warmth that no amount of polished chrome could fill. And at home, Sarah's quiet disapproval became a palpable presence, a subtle tension that coiled around our elegant dinner table. Billy, too, started noticing the revolving door of new, less familiar faces, or increasingly no faces at all as I phased out staff in favor of a skeleton crew and eventual automation. He asked fewer questions, but watched more, his bright, observant eyes absorbing the quiet changes. The moral problem, a festering wound beneath my meticulously crafted image, was starting to ooze. It wasn't just a corporate decision anymore. It was seeping into the sanctity of my home, a subtle injustice that slowly began to poison the air I breathed. I doubled down on my efficiency mantra, convinced that any lingering discomfort was merely the resistance to change, a weakness I couldn't afford. The automated cleaning robots I'd invested in were the future, a silent, tireless workforce that didn't demand benefits, sick days, or a living wage. They were sleek, silver machines that navigated the polished floors of quantum innovations with quiet determination, their laser sensors scanning for dust particles. I even bought a smaller model for the Hamptons estate, eager to prove its efficacy and eliminate the last vestiges of human cleaning staff from my personal life. The temporary relief I felt after the firings now morphed into a smug satisfaction. I was a visionary, a trailblazer. I scheduled a press conference, not just to announce Quantum Innovation's latest quarterly profits, which were predictably phenomenal, but also to unveil our Smart Clean initiative. Standing before a bank of microphones, flanked by gleaming robots, I delivered a practice speech about innovation, sustainability, and the future of facility management. I spun the narrative masterfully, presenting the robots as a progressive solution, not a cost-cutting measure for human jobs. "We are not replacing people," I declared, my voice resonating with carefully modulated sincerity. "We are elevating them, freeing them from mundane tasks to pursue more meaningful endeavors while ensuring a cleaner, healthier environment for everyone." The media bought it, or at least they reported it without much skepticism. The stock market reacted positively, analysts praising my foresight. I truly believed I had resolved the situation, transformed a potentially controversial decision into a PR victory. I had dodged any moral bullet, or so I thought. At home, however, the automated cleaner was less a marvel of technology and more a constant, low-humming reminder of my choices. It often missed corners, bumped into furniture, and had a peculiar habit of getting stuck under Billy's bed. Sarah would simply raise an eyebrow, a silent judgment that spoke volumes without a single word. Our conversations grew shorter, more superficial. She spent more time in her studio, painting, or with Billy, immersing herself in his world of imagination and innocence, a world I found myself increasingly locked out of. One evening, as I was reviewing market reports in my study, my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. "Mr. Harrington?" a soft, hesitant voice asked. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, my former housekeeper, a woman who had worked for us for nearly a decade, a woman whose gentle humming could often be heard echoing through the halls of our home. I was just calling to see if there might be any other work, sir, even odd jobs. Things are difficult." My stomach clenched, a fleeting pang of something I quickly suppressed. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, my voice carefully modulated, "I'm afraid Quantum Innovations has moved into a fully automated cleaning model. There's really nothing available. I wish you the best, of course." I hung up, my hand trembling slightly. I told myself it was for the best, that she would find something, that I couldn't be responsible for every single person. Later that week, during dinner, Billy, unprompted, said, "Daddy, I miss the lady who used to sing while she cleaned. She had a pretty voice." Sarah's gaze met mine across the table, a knowing look of quiet reproach. I tried to make a joke, to change the subject, but Billy's words hung in the air, a small, innocent indictment. The micro-triggers were adding up, little drops of unease that threatened to erode the carefully constructed dam of my rationalizations. And if it were you, faced with a clear choice between the bottom line and people you barely knew, would you have the courage to do the same, to dismiss them, knowing their struggles for the sake of profit and progress? The question echoed in the quiet hum of the robotic cleaner, a constant, nagging presence that refused to be silenced. The automated system, for all its advertised brilliance, wasn't perfect. Small but noticeable issues began to appear, first at the office, then even at home. Dust bunnies gathered in overlooked corners, coffee rings stained conference room tables, and a persistent faint odor of burnt circuitry replaced the fresh scent of lemon polish. I found myself snapping at my assistants, frustrated by these minor imperfections, but stubbornly refusing to admit that my initial decision was flawed. "It's a transition period," I'd bark. "The robots are still learning." But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, fertilized by Sarah's increasingly distant demeanor and Billy's quiet observation. The house, once a sanctuary of warmth and meticulous order, now felt off. The automated cleaner, which I'd proudly installed, frequently got stuck behind the sofa, emitting a pathetic little beep, or would wander aimlessly in circles, having missed entire sections of the living room. It was irritating, inefficient, and a constant visible reminder of what I had replaced. One afternoon, while looking for a lost remote control, I rummaged through Billy's art supplies. He loved to draw, his imagination boundless, his crayon masterpieces adorning every available surface in his room. I chuckled at a drawing of a rocket ship blasting off to Mars. Then my eyes landed on something else. It was a picture of our house, rendered in vivid, childish colors. There was Sarah in the garden, a simplified version of me in my study with a tiny phone to my ear, and Billy himself, playing with his dog, Rocket. But in the corner, almost an afterthought, was a small, sad-looking figure with a broom. John initially dismissed it as a child's drawing, another whimsical creation. It was just a little cleaner figure, perhaps inspired by some cartoon. I picked up the drawing, intending to pin it to his corkboard, when a small, almost imperceptible detail caught my eye. Written above the sad figure, in Billy's careful, slightly wobbly block letters, was a speech bubble. It read, "I miss my job. I need to buy medicine for my grandpa." My breath hitched. It was Mrs. Rodriguez. He had drawn Mrs. Rodriguez, and he had somehow intuited her hardship, or perhaps she had shared a snippet of her life with him during her shifts. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a child's random scribble, it was a window into the consequence of my decisions, painted with the raw honesty of a 7-year-old. The cheerful humming that once filled the house, the quiet kindness of a woman who remembered Billy's favorite snacks and tucked little notes into his lunchbox, had been extinguished by my ruthless pursuit of the bottom line. And now her personal struggle, the need for Grandpa's medicine, a detail I, in my self-absorbed bubble, had completely overlooked, was staring me in the face, undeniable and heartbreaking. Sarah's growing distance suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't been judging my business acumen, she had been reacting to my callousness. Billy, too, seemed quieter, less boisterous. I'd attributed it to the usual phases of childhood, but now I wondered if he was absorbing the unspoken tension, the loss of a friendly face in his small, secure world. I even remembered overhearing Billy talking to his imaginary friend, a small, whispered conversation about wanting the nice lady to come back. I had dismissed it as childhood fantasy, a harmless flight of imagination, but now it wasn't fantasy. It was a cry for a lost connection, a plea for the return of a warmth I had so carelessly discarded. The truth had come to light, not through a boardroom exposé or a media scandal, but through a child's crayon drawing, and in that moment the roles had indeed inverted. I, the powerful CEO, the master of my universe, felt like the guilty party, while a simple, innocent drawing had transformed the unseen victim into a vivid, suffering individual. The numbers on my spreadsheet had gained a face, a story, and a profound, undeniable human cost. I was deeply disturbed. The image of Mrs. Rodriguez, drawn by my son, and her imagined plea for Grandpa's medicine, wouldn't leave me. I tried to rationalize it, to push it aside as an emotional overreaction. "It's just a drawing, John," I told myself, pacing my lavish study, the automated cleaner humming ineptly in the living room below. Billy is a sensitive boy. He heard something, misunderstood, But the words felt hollow, a flimsy shield against the growing storm within me. I kept seeing the faces of the people I had fired, no longer abstract numbers in a spreadsheet, but individuals with lives, families, and struggles. The weight of my actions, once comfortably distant, now pressed down on me with suffocating force. I found myself scrolling through news reports late into the night, not for market trends, but for local unemployment figures, for stories of families struggling to make ends meet in our affluent city. Each article felt like another indictment. The guilt was a physical ache, a knot in my stomach that even my expensive scotch couldn't dull. Sarah's subtle disapprovals intensified. One evening, I overheard her on the phone, her voice hushed. "He's just so focused on work, you know. Sometimes I wonder if he even sees us, sees anything beyond the bottom line." She was talking about me, and her words pierced through my carefully constructed facade of indifference. Sleep became a battlefield. I would lie awake, the silence of the mansion amplified by the absence of human activity, tormented by imagined scenarios. Mrs. Rodriguez unable to afford her father's medication, families facing eviction, children going hungry because I had decided to optimize my cleaning staff. Then, one quiet Saturday morning, the confrontation I had unknowingly dreaded finally arrived. Billy, sensing my unusual quietness, approached me as I sat, unseeing, staring out at the manicured lawns. He didn't come with demands or accusations, just with the pure, unadulterated honesty of a child. "Daddy," he began, his voice soft, his eyes wide and earnest, "why can't the nice ladies come back? They like to clean our house. They made it sparkly." He didn't understand firing in corporate terms, but he understood sadness, understood absence. Then he held out another drawing. This one was even more specific, more heartbreaking. It depicted a group of sad people, including a clear, unmistakable Mrs. Rodriguez, standing outside our house, their faces downturned. Above their heads, in bold, stark crayon, were crude signs. "We miss our jobs. We need work. Please come back." My heart shattered. It wasn't just a general sentiment. It was a direct representation of the anguish I had caused, visualized, and presented to me by the person I loved most in the world. This innocent plea, combined with the devastatingly detailed drawing, made me finally break. All my rationalizations, all my defenses, crumbled into dust. I saw it all clearly. My relentless ambition, my obsession with efficiency, my utter lack of empathy, had blinded me to the human cost of my decisions. My own flaw, glaring and ugly, was laid bare by the purity of my son's heart. I wasn't just a successful CEO. I was a man who had caused real suffering for the sake of an extra percentage point on the balance sheet. Tears, hot and unexpected, streamed down my face. I pulled Billy into a tight hug, burying my face in his soft hair, the crayon drawing clutched in my trembling hand. "I'm so sorry, Billy," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Daddy made a mistake, a big mistake." The realization was excruciating, a profound moral awakening. "You also lost someone to pride, didn't you? That feeling of needing to be right, to be the most efficient, the wealthiest. What does it cost? What does it truly cost to stand on top of that mountain if you've left a trail of broken spirits in your wake?" The question wasn't for Billy. It was for myself, and for anyone who had ever made a similar choice. I was shattered. The weight of my callousness pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. The choice was stark, almost unbearable. Maintain the image of the cold, unfeeling, successful CEO, or confront my errors, admit vulnerability, and seek genuine redemption, even if it meant a temporary dent in my carefully curated public persona, and more importantly, in my pride. It was a battle between money and conscience, between my deep-seated pride and the profound love I felt for my son and family. The wealth I had amassed suddenly felt tainted, hollow. A profound internal conflict raged within me, each rationalization crumbling under the undeniable truth revealed by Billy's innocent art. I needed to talk to Sarah, truly talk, for the first time in months. She listened, her expression unreadable at first, as I poured out my confession, my guilt, my sudden painful clarity. She didn't interrupt, just watched me, her gaze steady and unwavering. When I finished, she simply said, her voice soft but firm, "It's not enough to feel bad, John. What are you going to do?" Her words, direct and unsparing, were another necessary blow. It wasn't about my feelings, it was about my actions, about the real-world impact I had created. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of activity, but it was a different kind of whirlwind than my usual corporate conquests. I had my assistant, a usually unflappable woman named Brenda, discreetly research Mrs. Rodriguez and the other former employees. The stories I uncovered were even more heartbreaking than I had imagined. Lost homes, mounting medical bills, children pulled out of extracurricular activities. One former cleaner, a young single mother, had taken on 3 minimum-wage jobs just to keep a roof over her head. My automated cleaning systems, it turned out, were indeed failing, requiring frequent maintenance, and in some areas were simply incapable of matching the thoroughness of human hands. The cold, logical data now reinforced the human value I had so recklessly dismissed. The climax, when it came, wasn't a public spectacle in a boardroom, but a quiet, deeply personal collapse. I called a meeting with my executive team, not to discuss quarterly earnings, but to announce a radical shift in company policy. I stood before them, my voice thick with emotion, and publicly admitted my mistake. We made a judgment call that prioritized short-term cost savings over long-term human value, I stated, looking each of them in the eye. And I, as CEO, take full responsibility for that error in judgment. I outlined a plan, a complete reversal of the automated cleaning initiative, a pledge to rehire all the janitorial staff, not just at their previous salaries, but with significantly improved benefits, including comprehensive health insurance and a robust educational fund for their children. I committed quantum innovations to a substantial donation to a local community fund, specifically earmarked for families affected by unemployment. The room was silent, a mix of shock and, I hoped, a burgeoning sense of relief. Then came the hardest part, personally calling Mrs. Rodriguez. My hand trembled as I dialed her number. She answered, her voice tired. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I began, my voice thick with genuine emotion. "This is John Harrington. I'm calling to offer you your job back, with better pay and benefits, and I want to sincerely apologize for the hardship I caused you and your family." There was a long silence on the other end, then a shaky sigh. Her voice, when it came, was laced with a mix of disbelief and lingering hurt. "Mr. Harrington, my grandpa, he needed that medicine." The words were a knife to my heart. "I know," I choked out, "and I am so incredibly sorry. We will help with his medical bills, anything you need." The conversation was difficult, raw, full of a mix of her cautious relief and the undeniable pain my actions had inflicted. I knew then that an apology wasn't a magic wand, and a job offer couldn't erase the fear and suffering she had endured. My company might take a hit in the short term, but my reputation among employees and the community started to mend, slowly, tentatively. However, the emotional trust with Sarah and Billy, though improving, would require time, patience, and consistent effort to fully rebuild. This wasn't a quick fix. It was the beginning of a long, arduous journey toward genuine redemption. The justice was being done, but the emotional loss, the profound regret for the suffering I had caused, was a burden I would carry for a very long time. The janitors were back. The hum of the automated cleaners had been replaced by the quiet sounds of human activity, the gentle swish of a mop, the occasional snippet of conversation, and yes, the soft, melodious humming of Mrs. Rodriguez as she moved through the halls of quantum innovations. It was a sound I had come to appreciate, a living soundtrack to an office that finally felt like it had a soul again. At home, Billy was happier, his laughter echoing through the rooms. He drew new pictures now. Mrs. Rodriguez smiling, holding a balloon, and in one corner his grandpa looking healthy. He even drew me in his childlike hand, with a smaller, more gentle smile. I saw the difference not just in the cleanliness of the building or the warmth in my home, but in myself. I found myself listening more, truly hearing the concerns of my employees, not just the data on a spreadsheet. I started a new initiative, Quantum Care, a fund dedicated to supporting local families in need, particularly those facing medical emergencies or job displacement. It was a tangible effort to make amends, to reinvest in the very community I had so carelessly overlooked. A small, genuine smile from Mrs. Rodriguez one morning as she passed me in the hallway felt like a profound reward, a fragile step towards forgiveness. A spontaneous hug from Billy, just because, was a balm to my wounded soul. And Zara, her eyes now holding a softer, more understanding light, would occasionally reach for my hand across the dinner table, a silent acknowledgement of the shift within me. I was still John Harrington, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech company, but the man looking back at me from the polished surfaces of my office was irrevocably changed. The ruthless ambition that had once defined me had been tempered by a newfound empathy, a painful but essential lesson learned from a child's crayon. I still had my immense wealth, my sprawling estate, my high-tech gadgets, but the meaning of rich had expanded beyond financial figures. It now encompassed the richness of human connection, the value of compassion, and the profound, quiet satisfaction of making a positive difference. The path to redemption was long, and I knew I couldn't erase the past, couldn't undo the suffering I had caused. There were still days when the guilt would resurface, a cold wave of regret washing over me. But those waves were now interspersed with moments of genuine connection, of real purpose. I often wondered if I could truly forgive myself, if the scars of my ruthlessness would ever truly fade. But perhaps forgiveness wasn't the goal. Perhaps the goal was simply to never forget and to always strive to be better. Tell me, what would you have done? Would you have listened to the whispers of your conscience or let the roar of ambition drown them out? What would your child have taught you? The question lingered, a quiet challenge in the otherwise silent room. The company's bottom line soared, yes, but my soul, that was a different, far more expensive ledger.